Pak Bambang, the finance minister cut the growth projection for Indonesia for this year. And we're at Parliament cutting the growth projection for next year. And for both occasions, it was estimated to be about 5%. Is 5% the new normal for Indonesia?
Yes, I believe for this year, 2019, the projection might be cut from 5.3 to either 5.1 to 5.2, but probably it will be not higher than what we had last year, which is 5.17%. For next year, initially we are thinking about 5.5, but I believe we still have a couple of months to come up with a better estimation for next year. So let's say between 5.3 to 5.5% could be a possibility for the next year. Of course, everybody will think, why can we, jump relatively quickly in just a 1 year period? But I believe for this year, 5.1 to 5.2 still achievable.
What would you like to see from Bank Indonesia to help boost growth?
Well, I think Bank Indonesia, focusing on the stability of the currency as their first priority. And I believe they have done something to give some kind of stimulus to the economy, aside from, cutting the rate. Probably for the rest of this year, they might do, this rate reduction as long as, of course, the global condition is conducive and the Federal Reserve doing what they have done so far by increasing the rate, and instead, it might be even decreasing the rate like President Trump suggested to the Federal Reserve Governor.
Yeah. You talked about possibility of a rate reduction. Bank Indonesia has suggested it could possibly do that. How deep can those cuts be? We saw, rates increase by 175 basis points. Yeah. Can 175 basis points be completely unwound?
Well, I don't think it will be, once central bank has increased by 1.75, it will be reduced by 1.75 at one time. I think they will do it at, several stages.
But it will get to 175, you think? Will that be unwound
I think it depends
over several stages?
Of course, it depends on the economic situation this year and the next year. But the most important thing is the sign that central banks start to be comfortable with the condition of the currency, stability of currency, and start thinking about how to boost the economic growth itself.
Are you comfortable with where the rupiah is right now? Stability has returned, but should the currency be where it is right now?
Yeah, at least we can see from day to day the appreciation tendency of rupiah. And I think it's good, showing that from the external balance, both balance of payment and current account, at least we are doing okay in our range. Usually we are trying to target current account deficit around 2.5% of our GDP.
Bloomberg ran a story recently talking about a possible cabinet reshuffle, especially when it comes to the economic team in Indonesia, expected to be in October. What can you tell us about that?
Well, again, the cabinet reshuffle discussion will be up to the president. It is the prerogative of the president. But certainly in the last cabinet meetings, president emphasized on two things related to the economic development: the investment and the export. I think our investment performance somehow less than what we need actually, because usually we need investment growth higher than 7%, but last time our investment growth was only around 5 to 6%. And then export, as you know, we experienced the trade deficit, in the first 4 to 5 months of this year. And so far, we haven't had any resurgence of the export growth itself. So I think if there are discussion about reshuffle or new economic direction, it will be focusing on how to improve both investment and export.
Infrastructure is one of the priorities for the Jokowi government.
Yeah.
It's been since day one. there's some indication that he wants to cut the dominance of state-owned enterprises in the funding of infrastructure projects in Indonesia. What are your thoughts on that? Do you agree?
Yeah, I think the reason why state-owned enterprise was very active on the very first years of the Pak Jokowi first cabinet, simply because at that time, we cannot expect too much from the private sector. Private sector, especially domestic private sector, at that time do not have kind of appetite to go to infrastructure because it needs long-term financing. So instead, President, to accelerate, give the assignment, special assignment to the state-owned enterprise. That's why state-owned enterprise becomes very dominant. But recently, President already suggested that state-owned enterprise can now control themselves. They have to look at their, of course, their leverage, whether their debt to debt to equity has been at the level. So now President emphasized on how to involve more private sector, both foreign and domestic, into infrastructure investment.
Is there a sense of how much you would need from the private sector for infrastructure development in Indonesia?
Yeah, on the first 5 years, our estimation at planning agency, we need around 350 billion US dollar for the whole infrastructure investment, in which 40% coming from our budget, 25% from the state-owned enterprise, and the rest basically from the private sector, which is 35%. And then for the next 5 years, we have new estimate. We need even more, 440 billion US dollar, but the composition will be about the same, in which private sector will have a higher role compared to the state-owned enterprise. So hopefully, starting next year, 2020, the first year of the second Pak Jokowi term, we can have private sector more dominant in building infrastructure.
Given the current environment, is it too ambitious to think that Indonesia can rein in its current account deficit?
Well, of course, your initial question about why we grow only 5%. And then one of the reason is because we have the deficit. When we did comparison with other ASEAN countries, for example, I think only Indonesia and Philippines experienced the deficit. The rest basically surplus. And the surplus usually comes from the big surplus in the trade balance. So it means the deficit, current account deficit, actually is one of the constraints why we cannot grow too much higher than 5%. So again, reducing current account deficit to 2% or even 1.5% to GDP will be the priority for the next 5 years. And the main instrument to do that is to revitalize our manufacturing sector, as well as promoting more services, especially the tourism.
Pak Bambang, just one final question. What do you view as the biggest risk for the Indonesian economy? Is it still the US-China trade war?
Well, I didn't say that US-China trade war is the biggest one, but of course it has impact on the short term. But in the medium to long term, I think we need to gain advantage from this US-China trade war by trying to lure the relocating of investment in China into other parts of Asia, including Indonesia. The bigger risk, I believe, is more on our dependence to natural resources. So far, we have to admit in the last 10 years, I would say that we depend so much on natural resources. So far, I mean, in most of the time, it has been in our favor. But of course, in the last few years, it's not in our favor. So that's why our trade balance becomes a deficit instead of surplus. So I think the next 5 years, clearly, we should diversify our economy by reducing the dependence of natural resources into more role of the manufacturing sector.
Pak Bambang, thanks so much for your time today.
Okay, thank you so much.
Terima kasih ya, Pak.
Yeah.